understanding and like perspective and like being able to clearly see the story for what it is instead of just like, well, it has this, well, it has that. Why does it have this? What is it? I'm like, listen, you can't nitpick. You got to be able to like listen to the person, hear what they have to create, and then like reciprocate. You know what I mean? Like, you're not the one
It's
that wrote
a
the
tough
story.
thing. I learned that when I was asking people to read my book, beta readers or just early reviews. Some people know how to look at something in that whole, like this is what Neil Laird has decided to write. Others want to give you notes on only what they would have written or the things that why didn't you talk more about Ramsay the Great? I really love Ramsay the Great. I'm disappointed. They'll pick one little thing that somehow
I know.
becomes the reason why they dismiss it out of hand. And that's not just a book, that's anything. I work in television, so, you know clearly people will come along and they have I won't call it an agenda. It's just that criticism is very different than personal choice, and people confuse the two.
It's also the fact that we're talking about history, okay? Where when even for example, even in your case where it's a fictional story and there's a lot of history that's based and baked within it. A lot of these figures existed in a time that we don't live in it anymore. Okay, we don't live in a place where we're in the middle of Africa, right smack dab between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, and there's an empire that's ruled by kings that think they're gods, and
Mhm.
people literally worship them like as if they're gods. This kind of stuff doesn't exist anymore, man. We got the freaking internet.
We're going back, thousands of years too. So those of us who looking for historical veracity, it's like, look, we're all trying to do the best here, and we can talk about this. I don't know if do a setup or whatever, but this is some of the stuff we'll get into. But clearly, making documentaries and then shifting to fiction was an eye opener for me, and I had to really sort of rethink about how I tell stories and the liberation of being able to make shit up because it's okay. It's a
It
time
is.
travel romp. It's okay to make some stuff up.
Nothing nothing needs to be perfect, but you know what also kind of works in as its own enemy? And I'll give you a great example of this. You have because I know you make documentaries. You have those people that make those documentaries on like bizarre ideas. Even going as far as like the dinosaurs or even alien life on other planets. And obviously a lot of this you need fiction because dinosaurs were around like 60 million years ago. We have somewhat of some fossils. We have some
Yeah.
idea what's going on. We don't really know about alien life except this planet. So sometimes you get those people that go really far beyond the box, like really, really far behind the box. I'm just like, okay, I understand that this is somewhat imaginary, but this is a little too much. Just
Yeah.
a little too much.
You have to decide what story you're telling. I mean, if you want to create a total fiction of like why aliens came here and built the pyramids, whatever, you're already in a world of fantasy. So you tell the audience is all supposition. But if you are telling a story about the rise of the new kingdom and you start creating stories of what they thought and what they said, and it's a very difficult thing, and not particularly in my TV business where we have to footnote everything. But again, I worked on shows like How the Universe Works or ancient mysteries and stuff. Well, you simply don't know what happened in the next Cosmo over. You have to tell a narrative for people to get hooked. If just a bunch of information and numbers, people will tune out. So you have to recognize the fact that you have to script it. It doesn't mean you make shit up. It's based on assumed fact. But you can't just stick to just a Wikipedia page because that's not what television is for. People
No.
come to be entertained and edified. So you have to blend the two, sometimes seamlessly, sometimes not.
Yeah, and also there are times in those instances where those things do come up to light. Like for example, Nero, this city of Nero. Like we thought it was a myth for years until it was actually proven to be a real place. Now, did can you theorize that okay, we should have known that it was a real place from the beginning? No, because based on the information, like you said, based on scripted, the data, the archaeological artifacts, the books and things that were written around that time, that's where we came to a logical conclusion. We didn't have any hard fact evidence until we actually found the place.
Precisely. And a lot of times, that goes both ways where people would say, well, there's a lost city that's going to, people start looking for Atlantis. And it's like, I'm sorry, the Atlantis we know doesn't exist. There may be a lost Greek city that either collapsed in an earthquake off the coast of Crete or whatever. But the idea of Atlantis was, something that Plato created for a myth that became something larger than life. But you could still find some evidence of that. So therefore, I think people can kind of take those concepts too far. But then conversely, you have something like Göbekli Tepe, which like near is a place where people never thought that people always assumed up until the 90s that the rise of cities, the rise of culture as we know it, started about 6 or 7 thousand BC because there was no evidence to prove otherwise. Then this amazing site in central Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, which is like a early Stonehenge with writings and all these odd things over it was found, and it's at least 10 and a half, 11,000 years old. Totally changes the paradigm, totally shifts everything completely because we no one saw it coming. So we have to recognize we are only looking at what we know based on the empirical evidence, and that's just by digging around the dirt. At the end of the day, archaeology is digging around the dirt. And if you happen to dig over here instead of here, you may miss that beautiful portal that takes you to the center of the earth, or the lost city that collapsed 10,000 years ago because you dug 3 meters too far away.
Well, there's
So it's
also
fascinating. It's still mystery.
it is very much a mystery, but also in the sense where religion has played a very key role of controlling narratives. Okay. I come from a Jewish background, and I know that within Judaism, there is this concept of where the world is only 6,000 years old. It was
Right.
only made in 7 days. Like, very bare bones, materialistic, set in stone ideology that if we look at the facts, there's nothing really that's backing it. Like,
No. No, we can prove it out of hand already by DNA. Well, not by DNA, maybe by DNA and by carbon dating. So
and
that's already antiquated.
right, and also the idea of 7 days. First off, by the way, like, in a lot of different cultures, the idea of days, you take even, for example, we were talking about this when we did the pre-call, like, with Mayan and Aztec culture. Their view of days were cycles.
Mhm.
So, what does that mean? Does that mean 24 hours? Does it mean that it was 1,000 years? Does it mean it was 1,000,000,000 years? Like, I that's what I'm saying. It's like we're you can go according to there's a lot of writing and historical, like, for example, even diagrams, hieroglyphics, and stone tablets, a lot of different things that have writing on them. But there still needs to be some level of, okay, is there a structure? Is there something? Maybe like in the ground itself, like we were talking about, like being able to check out the like within with the rocks itself to see the different
Right.
layers of the earth. There's all of these different elements. You can't just go according to one logic and say, okay, this is fact. So that means that this is true. I don't think that's how the world works, man.
But then you other people that are kind of coming out elsewhere and they're using different expertise and different technologies and they're seeing something very different. One of the last shows I did at Science Channel before I left the network a few years ago was a great show about the when humans first came to the Americas. And it's a fascinating story because it's very much about not just when humans came to the Bering Strait, but also about how the paleontology community didn't like to have their paradigm shifted anyway. So people were finding evidence that humans came tens of thousands of years earlier. They found evidence of them in the North America and Central America that suggests they pushed it way, way back, tens of thousands of years. But there was pushback from the academic community because that's not what they wrote their papers about. That's not what's in the books. That's not, so they became, these people who dare publish became pariahs. And it wasn't until some scientists that there's a great discovery. I don't know if you've read about it. It came up 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer, in the salt flats of New Mexico, where they found the footprints.
Hmm.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
and they were able to carbon
Incredible.
date that because it was like they had underneath human footprints following mastodons or other large beasts. There was organic material that had rotted. They were stepping on weeds because like a swamp. So they could carbon date that those weeds and say, "Oh my God, I forget the date, 30,000 years ago or something." Shifted it by tens of thousands of years. So, why I'm very wary of the pseudoscientists that come out and they brazenly claim that, oh, just because the scientists can't prove this, that I'm going to create a total fictional account on what I want to believe. I think those people are just lazy and they're chasing their own sort of book deals and things. But we also have to recognize that what we know is only a fraction of what happened in the ancient past. We're talking tens of thousands of years ago. Ramses the Great,
Yeah.
as I mentioned earlier, he's been dead for 3,500 years. So it's like a lot can happen and disappear in then, and a lot can still reappear.
It's it's so intricate and it's so complex, and there are so many different layers of what civilization and our story as people are on this planet. I Something that I really find very interesting is where when you look at, for example, our makeup as human beings, in many senses we are chemical creatures. Like, we have chemical reactions going on in our bodies constantly. And interesting enough, when you like look throughout history, the amount of interaction that people had with plant life and the environment around us, like, the way that people interacted with the stars when the night sky would come out, and how astrology was a very big part of Egyptian culture. And these, what do you call them? I'm trying to think. Not not memories.
Describe
They had like these vision. They had these visions. Like stories like Ezekiel is a great example of it.
right.
Bizarre, bizarre
Premonition.
visions.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Right.
So there are a lot of conclusions that can come up exactly where this is coming from. But like we said from the very beginning, is keep in mind where these people were living, what type of conditions they were under, what they were exposed to. That in itself could tell a lot about why they were saying these things.
Why? What?
Why they
You
were
missed a lot.
saying these things. Why
Yeah.
were they telling these stories?
And keep in mind,
Why
their
they felt it's
worldview was
important
far
to
more
write.
limited. They knew amazing things about the stars and plant lives and animal life, but the world was viewed limited in terms of like the Earth is round or it circles the sun. Other things they might have figured those things up on their own, but other things that just in terms of how and why things existed, science hadn't answered yet. So they're still living in a bubble. They really can focus very strongly on certain things about the world and other things they don't see yet because it took thousands of years of science to catch up with them and answer those questions. Why the sky is blue, whatever, you can't answer that until you get to atmospheric science in the 20th century, those kind of things. So those are fascinating when you look at their mythologies and things, because quite often that is a way, like any religion, to explain away the unexplained. To me, that's what religion is. It's like, why on earth do we suffer? Why on earth does it rain? Why on earth does it, did grandma die the way she did? And it's a way to kind of give some sort of narrative to things that simply don't make any freaking sense. Science has
And it
replaced that in many regards, but religion, that was basically the major reason for religion to begin with. I think it's like, okay, we're only gonna be around for 30 years before we get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. There has to be a point to all this.
Oh god, I do not want to be that person. Like, that thing has big enough teeth as it is. Oof. All I'm
It'd be
saying
over.
is you're basically going to
It'd be
be the
over
crusher.
quicker than probably, one bite would be over. So
Yeah. And I mean, it's just again, it's bizarre to even fathom. Okay, we live such a cushioned life in the sense where we don't have any understanding of predators anymore. Like, I mean, we are the predators. Okay, we kill every living, breathing thing in front of us. But being alive in a time where you in front of a tiger, you're not coming out. Like, the chances of you getting eaten by a tiger is a lot higher than getting
and
killed by a
still
man
today,
that's
if you
drinking too
wander
many
into
beers.
one of the Alaskan wilderness and come across a grizzly, my money's on the grizzly. You said to go to their world as opposed to them coming to ours, unless they're, the moose comes down looking for food or whatever. But yeah, and keep in mind though, we still have, pathogens are still out there. We just went through COVID. No one could figure out how to figure that out. That hit us sideways. So there are still enemies out there we haven't tamed. But in terms of the great beasts, we've been killing them off for so long. There's a lot left than there were.
But you know what? You bring up something that's really interesting, is that, like, even the smallest of things have become our greatest enemy. We're, I was, a lot of people know this. Mosquitoes are responsible for killing more humans than any other living thing on this planet.
Malaria, yeah.
Yeah, and they're tiny. Okay, we're used to seeing mosquitoes being large because generally when they drink, they start getting larger. But They're very, very, very small. And the smallest of things can be some of the most deadliest things. I think that's just an example of how we view the world where we don't strike fear. We don't strike the worry. We don't see the predator, but it's that
Keep in
small.
mind, we didn't know what a germ was until, like, the 1800s. They could chart the stars and know exactly when Venus was circling
They
Mars
didn't
or
even know
whatever.
what a shower was in the
They were
1800s, for
chat well,
God's
yeah,
sake.
they're eating shit off the ground, and they were getting sick, from, like, not washing their potatoes in the ground. So it's like, wow, that seems such an obvious thing now, but we went through most of history not understanding that germs kill, because you couldn't see them. You
And
can see the saber-tooth tiger.
you know what? I think that's something really important where science and technology and archaeology, all of these things change as time progress. To get in this notion that, okay, we have reached the pinnacle of science, I think that's a stupid thing to
That's
say.
right.
It's like
Anyone that says that has their head up their ass, yeah.
it's constantly changing. And I think it's okay to science to say, hey, we made a mistake 5 years ago. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Listen, religion denies doing that, and guess where they are? Like I think science and archaeology should be the set example.
Well,
It's
they
okay
try
to
to
admit
be,
you're
I
wrong.
think the good ones, and, like, because I work in that community with my films, obviously, I'm not a scientist and archaeologist, but I've made so many films about them, and
But
I
you're
really
working around
respect
those
the
people.
community.
You're working around those
I
people to be
work
able
in,
to
and
make these
I really
stories.
respect most of them. Don't have, I mean, they have agenda only that they have to publish and they have to get funded. So, like anybody else, they got to hustle for the job. But they know that, and any archaeologist I talk to knows that what we found is our theory and it has to be peer reviewed. But we for the moment, this is all we know. A scientist and what looks at what a bone they found of an early human ancestor, they recognize this is the best guess they have for now. And I think they know that in time, they may be dismissed out of hand when something else is found that proves them wrong. But for the moment, this is our best guess.
Until the day they figure out how the hell did alligators and crocodiles manage to survive as long as sharks? I want to be the first one to find out, okay? I'm just saying cuz
You need that time machine, baby, and a lot of
and
time on your hands to watch evolution.
it's just it's just bizarre because if you think about it, right? You have we were talking about just tens of thousands of years of history and things changing and civilizations ending and entire planet changing all over the place. And then all of a sudden, like you have this thing that just survives the testament of time. The same, like a shark. It's been around longer than freaking stars in the sky. Same.
Some things just, and you just built. You think about it. I mean, again, this is me like going off script because I am no biologist. But you look at like how a crocodile is shaped. It's pretty simple. It's a long tube, and it does exactly what it needs to do. Yeah, it's got big teeth to eat. It's got a long tube to digest, and then it just shits it out in the end in a big tube. So it doesn't really need to be improved. It, it's not really an evolutionary dead end. It pretty much works. I'm sure there's much more complicated reasons for why it survived than that, but in a way, it's like it's pretty well designed already.
I think if you want to get a little bit into the sci-fi realm for a minute, it kind of can be an explanation with human beings, right? Where we know that there were many different species of humans. But for some odd reason, Homo sapiens have survived the testament of time. We've been around one of the shortest periods of most other human species. And it's not that we're perfectly designed. I think what it is that we are the type of human species that figured out more than any on how to manipulate our environment better
Yeah,
than
because
any.
of the
Because
brains.
if
It
we
wasn't
look
like
at
yeah, go on.
look
Sorry.
at nature, look at the species and creatures that manipulate in the environment and see how they survive. They flourish, every single one of them.
Yeah, I mean, look, we had the brain, so we were able to take over and ride roughshod over other culture, other creatures and things. Where like the three-toed sloth, the laziest, most craven critter on the planet, it's been around for millions of years. It doesn't need to evolve. It doesn't need to build cities or motorways
Uh,
or kill other
Fucking
creatures and
sloth.
sloth. It's just fucking hanging in a tree, and then eventually it falls out of it and dies. And they've been doing that for billions of years.
It's hilarious they put that in Zootopia as the dude in the DMV, and I'm like, "Oh,
Oh, that's
of
brilliant, yeah.
course it's gonna be a sloth. Of course it's gonna be a sloth."
I just had to get my license renewed in, like, downtown Brooklyn, and it's like everyone behind the bulletproof glass is a sloth. It's so obvious
Yeah.
where they were by. Somebody who wrote that clearly had just gotten their driver license renewed too.
It's like, when you think about a sloth in the real world environment, okay, any predator is just like, "This is a quick meal." I mean, you don't even have to chase it, you could take a
No,
nap, you could swing your
no,
tail back and forth, hit the flies.
it's just doing its thing, and again, I don't know how long it's been around, I'm sure a long
Long
ass
time.
time, and it's I don't think it's evolving, you know?
No, but you know
Right
what? It's
right
such
where
an
it wants to be.
it's such an interesting thing because it tells a very deep story about our planet, and not only just the story about human civilization, just how things have been around on this earth for so long. Because in the end of the day, like I said before, most of this is just chemical reactions mixing with one another. And then as time goes on, they either mix more, or they just kind of stay the same.
And when you try to
You
tell the
know?
narrative of
It's
it, of course,
weird.
there's huge gaps of sometimes billions of years, so it's impossible to connect dots over the large. I remember
What does that even mean? What
one
does
of the
that
most
even mean?
exciting
What is it
experiences.
like? It's crazy.
See, I did a show years ago for History Channel called Evolve, and we looked at the evolution of sight, the evolution of hearing, and whatever else. Forget what it was so long ago. Um, but one of the coolest experience I had as a producer was I went to Harvard where a guy a few years ago had found a creature way up in northern Canada called the Tiktaalik, I think. And it truly is the missing link. It was a fish with legs. And it was found in the middle of a barren snow and wind-swept hill somewhere way north of Canada. And it was actually you still had some of the skin on it because I guess it was frozen in the permafrost for so long. But if you
That's
Google it,
crazy.
Tiktaalik or whatever, and it is a missing link in that it still has gills, it still looks like a fish, but it's a fish that can crawl on land, which is one of the big questions. How did we go from fish to mammals, to reptiles? Well, here's one early example. Someone actually found it.
Oh my. Wait, I'm
I don't know
like,
how
I'm trying. Whoa.
to
What?
Tik-Tik.
What?
You got it?
Yeah, this is very interesting.
Right?
You know,
It's a fish and it's a, I don't know if it's a reptile, it's in between.
it reminds me though of like crocodiles and alligators, particularly
Yeah.
lizards.
Well, yeah, but
You know,
those are
it
so reptiles, they could come up and breathe. This thing, apparently, if I recall, you have to Google it and look more, still was a fish that could live underwater, but it had legs, so somehow it came on land for other reasons as well. So again, it takes us back to the absence of evidence doesn't prove anything else. And here's an example of it, out of a needle in a haystack, they actually found a creature that explains one of the biggest evolutionary questions in our planet's history. How did we go from the water to the sea? That may not just be this creature. We don't know when it
but
falls on the scale, but here is a creature that did both. So at some point, some critter who was swimming around
yeah.
decided, let's get some legs and let's go out and eat the berries and avoid the sharks and the mastodons, or not the mastodon. What do you call the big sharks? The megalodons.
Megalodons
Megalodons. Yeah,
went extinct because they were too big for them to eat. Kid you not. That
yeah.
is
I'm not
actually
sure
the
why they
most
went. I'm not sure if
hilarious thing about
I'm not sure if they
yeah, it was
got.
because of their size.
They came after. Actually, they came much after that the K2 explosion, the dinosaurs, right? They were more. I forget why they died out, but they were after the whole asteroid event.
I think something that gets lost in translation. Again, I'm not a scientist. I'm not an archaeologist. I'm just a sci-fi geek and nerd. But we tend to forget that one of the ways that life, or in our case, single cell organisms, start to evolve and adapt, and you start running into the whole evolvement that we have on this planet, I think plays a key role with our oceans. Because if you look at other planets, and I think maybe this is the direction that we're getting wrong, because I was reading from a scientist and he was kind of explaining this, like a planet that has a body of water doesn't necessarily mean that it inhabits life. It's just one form of life that exists. We know that life can exist in other forms besides this one, but it's interesting in how on this planet specifically, a lot of life seems to start from salt water, specifically salt water and ocean,
Mhm.
and then move its way to land. Now, this may not apply to everything, but this
Right.
applies to a lot
About
of different species of
temperature and
creatures.
about the oxygen, all the other things that are in the water too. It's not just water itself, as you say, yeah. And again,
Yeah,
that's not my area of expertise. But yeah, certainly like our waters were
we're just
perfect. It
having
was the
fun here.
Goldilocks.
We're just having fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's that?
No, I'm just saying, like, we're having fun over here. Like, I just think, again, this is the idea of where you can kind of change your narrative and your perspective, right? We were talking about this, you especially with your writing and making documentaries, of like being able to think outside of the box, but being able to stay within the narrative, getting all the information that you need to be able to tell the story. If you keep on saying the same narrative and the same story over and over again, even if it's been 60, 90, even 100 years, there hasn't been any new advancements. And like to your point, there has been new advancements. Our understanding of life and our history has been changing because we're now
Mhm.
understanding a different narrative that we haven't seen in a very long time.
And it's a different angle too. I've made over 1,000 hours of
Yeah.
TV, and so much of it has been history, archaeology, and history mystery shows. I mean, that's my bailiwick. And the golden recipe for that really is, yeah. I mean, if you look at like, let's say, the archaeology of Troy, the ancient city of Troy, or whatever. There's so many shows on that. Nothing really has been found that's changed the narrative in, say, the last 50, 60 years about Troy itself. But the way we can make it still fresh in television is a different angle. We ask different questions. If you look at those shows, we ask a lot of questions and we dangle those carrots early on. But could this really have been the same street that Achilles walked on? That alone shifts it. Then you can talk about Homer in a different way. You can talk about how roads were built by the Romans and it's Roman road versus Trojan road. It's a way to kind of get in and make an old story feel fresh. It's the questions you ask and the roads you lead people down, no pun intended. And that's why these shows can usually feel fresh because you're taking sometimes the same batch of information and you're just telling it in a different way or a different character you're following around. So I've done
Yeah.
Titanic. I've done a dozen Titanic shows. I've done a dozen Pompeii shows. I've done several dozen Egypt shows and King Tut. I don't know how many King Tut shows I did. How do you keep him fresh? Is a different angle that you come in. Was he crippled? How did he die? Where did he die? If you ask a different question and you focus on different clues, you can still go tell the same story about Howard Carter finding it and about the boy king in the New Kingdom. All that stuff hasn't changed, but it feels fresh merely because you shifted your POV.
Yeah. I think that's I think that's honestly like brilliant because oh my god, I have a friend of mine and we were going back and forth with Titanic. And it's hilarious because like recently they were able to do that full scan of the ship and they were able to answer some of questions that were been asked for already for a long time. So this is one of those conspiracies, and I love this stuff because some of it's like just you got to understand some information. Where the Titanic was actually the Olympic, which we know is not true, but
This is
and
the theory.
basically this is the theory that it
Okay.
was the Olympic and it was sunk for insurance claim reasons. So I've done some research, and I know you've done research because you've done work on this too. It's like okay, hold on one second. If you know anything about shipbuilding, especially in that time, they built three ships. They were built pretty much on the same platform. Like obviously the Titanic was different than the Olympic and the Britannic, but like there were technically three ships.
Right.
So okay. And then the other thing is like you understand that people in the 1900s were arrogant as shit. Like they clearly had an engineer that told them that you have compartments that are not fully sealed. Yeah, that's fine, but it's not going to be pretty enough. So don't put those doors.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of stupidity that came into this to begin with, right?
And
Like, it's
money,
not just some
and
wild
cost
zany
saving,
cre
nothing changed there, right? That would cost too much, so let's ignore that bit.
Yeah. So, it's like, you wanna think of it in a deeper idea of like, "Oh my god, like, there's this whole conspiracy, this whole narrative," but in, like, reality, it's just
Well, and here's there's just to use that as an example. Here's the big problem with conspiracy theorists. I remember I talked to a friend years ago who said, he was convinced that the Earth was flat, and I was able to send him to like 3 or 4 different places that proved in seconds
it's
why.
not flat.
He said there's no
It's not
proof of it.
flat.
Well, here's here, and here, starting with the space station showing a globe and going on. Well, yeah. So people don't like to look for the information. They come with a theory. So if you just take that ridiculous Titanic theory, well, first of all, if they're going to get insurance money, they were going to kill 1,500 people along with it. We want to get the money. We're going to wait until the maiden voyage when 2,500 people on it, so thousands of rich people and others can die, so we can collect our money. That doesn't make any sense. You can do it some, and also too, the Olympics was around until the 50s. The Britannic the sister ship went down in Greece. I did a show on that. And they're actually diving it this summer and bringing up the bell. And then
Wow.
and then the yes, and I'm a member of the Explorers Club, and a bunch of guys there are going to finally dive it. Someone actually bought the ship because it's still in Greek waters,
Finally.
and the Greeks have not
Okay.
allowed them to go and finally dive it. But this year,
I
because it's now
know.
hands. They're going to go get the bell, and they're going to get like the SOS. Um, you think that still exists? And obviously, they won't get any information about the Titanic, but they can see what it looks like because the whatever that system is, the Morse code or whatever it was, and the Titanic was destroyed, so they don't have that. So it's going to be a big thing in a couple of months when they go down. But again, it's like all this information is out there. So you can very easily disprove so many of these theories just by doing a little research on your own. But people like to choose these conspiracies because it flies in the face of what's being told. People don't like to be, handed a narrative. They like to question any authority. If the governments are involved or if rich people are involved, suddenly it becomes suspect. And I understand the roots of some of that. But again, it's just lazy thinking when people come at you and say, here's proof positive, why NASA faked the moon landing or why the earth is flat or why aliens built the pyramids. And I come back and say, here's 72 reasons why that's not true. All you had to do is Google it and you'd find on your own, or just talk to some people. The information is out there if you really care to.
It is. It is. And you know what? On the flip side to that, also, you have, again, in that realm of with even conspiracy theories, right? You have like MK Ultra is a great example of this, or Operation Paperclip, where
Right.
these are actual real events. It is true that Americans did bring in Nazi scientists and doctors from Germany, and
Hmm.
they helped construct a lot of stuff that we use today. You'd be very surprised of how much stuff that we had came from those people. And then you had a project MK Ultra where the government, the Central Intelligence, they were literally experimenting with people with psychedelic drugs. Now, they in a sense are were conspiracy theories, but again, we have that information to back these claims. We have the
Right.
paper trails. We know
Oh yeah, I would
where
never
these
say
things
the
happen.
government. I mean, listen, we also know this. I was born in the '60s, so I was a little too young for it. But I
Yeah.
remember my parents watching the Watergate scandal unfold. It's like there's an eye opener. Oh, here's our government being proved they're lying to us. They're sneaking around and a cover up and all that stuff. So there's no reason why we should trust the government totally on their own. We should definitely have an independent thinking. So bully for people who question the authority in that regard. But if the information is out there, independent of the government, and you still claim a conspiracy, then the joke's on you. You look
Yeah.
the fool.
It it's being able to have that honest balance, like you said, being able to have that open mind, being able to do a little bit of research. It's like, look, not every conspiracy theory is true. Some of
Mhm.
them have been proven to be true. And again, that kind of comes into being able to tell the story through a new lens.
Yeah.
We can now ask those new questions. We can be able to look at things a little bit more deeper.
And it gets trickier.
But
I'm sorry, Jeff. Yeah, go ahead.
no, but I think you can honestly answer this perfectly. Like, just because it's on Facebook doesn't mean it's true. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, and then and some it has to be the kind of information you're looking at.
Right.
If you're showing me some
Right.
ridiculous video of some guy who says, "Here's proof that the NASA faked the moon landing," and some guy with no credentials who's just being smug and jokey and manipulating footage, then you have to question the source. So you have to do more than just go down the rabbit holes you want to go down. It's trickier when you don't have that information. I just worked on a show called History's Greatest Mysteries, a Lawrence Fishburne show, and one of the scripts I wrote. Was about Caligula. Was Caligula mad or misunderstood? And if you know who Caligula was, he was an emperor, in the early Julio-Claudian dynasty in the first century, and he's considered up there with Nero, the worst emperor. He was absolutely
Was that, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the Roman Empire or the Greek Empire?
Roman, of the Roman Empire. So yeah,
Roman
and
Empire, okay.
Caligula is argued. Caligula kind of has the reputation of the craziest. He kind of set the agenda for all crazy Caesars afterwards. He made his horse a member of the Senate. Apparently, he sent his troops to go battle the sea when it was angry. He had to take the swords and attack the waves. He killed his sister. He was just he was there for 4 years, and he went down in
Hmm.
history as a mad emperor, and he probably was. But what's very interesting is you look at the history, some of the things that he did, it can be proven that, like, well, he made his horse a senator to say a F you to the senators who weren't doing anything. My horse could be a better senator than you. So in a way, he was having fun with it. But I mention it because everything we know about him and Augustus and Nero and all those emperors that we kind of think are crazy came from one guy named Suetonius who was writing 50 years after the fact, who had an axe to grind with them. So the
Mhm.
only history we have 2,000 years ago is a guy who simply didn't like them, was out to sully their names. So now today it is quote unquote proven fact that these emperors, who I'm sure weren't great guys, they were still friggin' emperors, but it's taken as fact merely because one source cannot be double checked. You know, so
Yeah.
I understand in that case where we only have one source, you have to be kind of questioned about what it is. But in today's world, if you don't like that one video about NASA, there's 100 others you can look at. Things that happened in the 20th century in the full light of history, we can now explore on our own. You can go to archive.org and find obituaries from
Yeah.
1901 and
Yeah,
find out
yeah,
the
yeah.
fact. So
There's
there's
there
no excuse for lazy
You're right,
thinking.
there's so much information online. There is, there's
Yeah.
so much information,
And
like,
it's not all BS. A lot of it is, you have to go in and question everything and see exactly if there's a narrative being built.
yeah.
But then you got to have independent thinking. So,
Yeah.
I mean, everybody does it. We all have our narrative we want to answer. If we go off a theory, we're looking just to prove that theory. We're going to cherry pick what we find, what we don't find.
It is. You know what? I I myself, being in the automotive industry, something like I love being able to read about history and even just being able, like, as an artist, just to understand what I'm doing. I just like filling my head with junk. When it comes to cars, because people like to give that thing with NASA, like, oh, they don't have their information from, like, where's all the information that they had when they went to the moon in 1969? The thing is that when you look at the Germans, is a great example. Okay, I I remember I spoke with a guy. He knew somebody that was working on this really old Porsche. This really old Porsche that, like, I think it was from like 1956 or something, 1957. They contacted Porsche in Germany. They were able to get the original papers for the work on, like, the engine, the transmission, all of the diagrams, everything. They had all of the original documents filed for this car, down to the studs. He told me, he said, the thing about it is, like, the Germans have been doing things that the Americans started doing in the 90s, or doing that in the 60s, like EFI, turbo, all of this stuff. Even adding on even computer systems in the early 70s. It's like, how did they do this stuff? Well, it's because they were so meticulous of keeping every little thing down to the numbers, the
Mhm.
the layout of what is it named, where is it labeled, where does it go. Yeah, this stuff sounds like freaking sci-fi, but again, when you have people that are extremely smart and in some ways crazy, they can create ideas and things that just seem abnormal, but as time progresses, we get better and better being able to make these things. So there's a lot of logical explanations to as to why were they able to do that stuff then and not being able to do now.
A lot of it's our own ignorance saying, well, since we can't do it, they
Yes.
could do it. And look, I can take it even further in my world, the pyramids. Everybody says the pyramids, there's no way they could have gotten it so exact. You can't take a credit card between the boulders and the pyramids, which mean it had to been made by, some other culture that came down. No, the Egyptians were just super friggin' smart and focused, and they were engineers, and they followed the stars, and they followed the patterns. And why do we have to disbelieve? Why do we have to dismiss out of hand that a group of people, just because it was, 4,500 years ago, couldn't possibly build something as intricate and as long lasting as the pyramids, because we haven't done it, and b, it's like we don't see the value in it today because the point of it has been lost. We don't need pyramids today, so therefore it had to have been some ooga booga thing that didn't come from human ingenuity, but from some creepy crawlies from Alpha Centauri. No, it was just a collective minds of the people at the time who came together for whatever reason, God or belief, or bringing a culture together, and created something magnificent. So
They
it's no
also
different than what the Germans were doing in a way. It's like it's focus and brilliance, and a lot of it comes down to our own ignorance, thinking that, well, since I can't pull it off, neither could you.
it's also keeping in mind, and I think we've talked about this, where technology, right? We think of technology as it has to be electronic. It has to require metal. It has to listen. It's very possible that there has been different technologies that have been developed over time. We do know that there is electromagnetism. We know that there's ways of manipulating water and magnets. There's ways of there's ways of manipulating a lot of things not using electricity. Okay? When you have really genius people that are living tens of thousands of years before us, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to figure out of creating technology that doesn't exist around electricity
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they didn't
They're not
have
going to say let's
electricity.
wait until electricity exists so we can create irrigation or aqueducts. They'll find some other way to do it, that uses leans into what they have at their disposal.
The Romans did that too. I mean, they created aqueducts and they created their own technologies without the lack of using electricity. We
We
don't
survived a
understand
long
this.
time without electricity, so we don't need it.
Yeah, we didn't. The thing about electricity that people don't understand is like this was an accident. We discovered electricity as an accident. And we then, over a long period of time, started understanding with science and physics of how
Mhm.
this works and how you're able to manipulate and use it. But this is something that's pretty recent. Again, this is where
Yeah.
our human minds kind of get trapped in this. Is like, oh my god, well, technology is only electricity. No, it's not.
Well, the
It's
one
only
of the things I
recent
have
that it's been
learned
like
over and over
this.
again, one of the things I like to bring in my books too, and because they time travel, is we definitely have this arrogant attitude that history is a trajectory. That people before us were stupider than us. They're all Neanderthals until we created X, X, and X. They didn't know what germs were. Look how dumb they are. But they also could create amazing aqueducts and they could irrigate fields in India for thousands of years. They just did. So just because they didn't have one thing doesn't mean they have something else. But history does not go like this. History is a circle. History is secular, and it's like we are not always getting smarter and wiser. We are learning things and forgetting them and relearning them, and we're kind of going in circles. Maybe we're going up a little bit in terms of some technologies, but in other cases, we are either going downhill or treading water. So I never believed that. I think you could take a guy from ancient Greece and plop him down at Harvard and teach him an education, and he'd be just as smart, if not smarter than us. Just because he's been dead for 4,000 years or whatever, does not mean that they were in any way inferior. So I always hate the idea. It's like, well, they're too primitive to have created X. How do you know that? How do you know how they thought? Just because they were living in stone buildings and hadn't created glass and porches yet, that does not mean that they were primitive people.
No, and I mean, look at the South American culture that spans thousands of years, where they figured out ways of creating things like terra preta. They figured out ways of using mycelium and different types of psychedelics and different types of plants for healing
Yeah,
and medicine. Like, yeah, they may have not known certain things that we know now, but they had a very good understanding of using their environment, agriculture, growing things, making civilizations, making cities.
yeah.
It's just a different lens of human civilization is as we
What we
progress,
need
like you
versus what they need, yeah. You know?
exactly.
Our needs are not theirs. We need planes and we need technology and mechanics, but they did need it for thousands of years. So to them, a world without an iPhone seems like an empty, cool place. But you go back 30 years ago and no one had one. So we often forget that we do live in our time and our place.
We
Yeah,
do.
we talked about this early on. I mean, one of the things in my book, Primetime Traveler series, is about a film crew that travels in the past. And one of the things I wanted to bring into it after all the years is I have the two lead characters in the book are gay. And in the first book, Jared, the TV producer, the director, comes out. And I did that because I'm gay and I wanted to talk, give some, make an Indiana Jones like character, which just happens to be gay as well. But also, too, what I've learned traveling in all that part of the world is in many ways, the ancient culture was far more enlightened with same sex love than it is now. So while we think that they were more primitive people, in terms of love and acceptance and tolerance, in many ways, it was far more open then. And I kept seeing examples of that over and over again in the Holy Land, even in Israel and in Egypt and in Baghdad and all these places you would think would be corrupt and today are very, very oppressive. Back then, they didn't give a toss who you loved. They didn't give a toss what your relationship was. And that was forgotten. That was changed with Christianity and other things. So once again, culture does not go up, it goes secular. We give and we take. We may
Yeah,
pop up here and run some great technology, but we go downhill somewhere else.
we do. And it's amazing in how you could see the swinging of the pendulum because we do live in this amazing time, right? Where we do have all of this acceptance. And, being a gay man in this country is a lot easier than it was 40 years ago. That's a fact.
Exactly. Yeah.
But at the same time, we forget of how in the ancient cultures and how it didn't need to be, the talk on every single freaking social media post. It didn't need to be the golden pillar at the goddamn table. You know, it's just something that people had. That was just a part of their life. We tend to forget that we as humans, when we cultivate, when we come together as a community, it's not about the color of our skin. It has nothing to do about our sexuality or our, lack or act of having a career or education. It's just the sheer fact that we're coming together as people. Either we don't know each other or we're really good friends and we're having a good time. You know, all these other things are just secondary. And I was telling you this before. This is something I loved about even looking at the Greek pottery. It's not that they're just showing nudity. It's like as you go around those vases, you see a story. Like you see
Yeah.
the old days where you used to roll this film and then you'd
Yeah,
see the
yeah, yeah,
horse
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
rolling around.
A narrative, yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So they would kind of do this with this vessel. And even if there maybe was gay depictions, it's like it's just it wasn't the main thing. It's just you're going around the
Because it wasn't
story
an
and it's
issue
just a
back
part.
then. It was just, the way it was. I mean, when you think there's a word for gay in ancient Egypt, people don't talk about it, but they probably didn't talk about it because there was nothing to talk about.
Nothing to talk about.
In the gatekeepers of my books, because it's a portal that my characters travel through. And I make them these two characters that I think we talked about this when we first met a few weeks ago,
Hmm.
based on a one of my favorite tombs in Egypt, one of my favorite places in Saqqara, which is north of Giza. And it's an old kingdom tomb that they call the Tomb of the Brothers. And when they found it in 1964, they called it two brothers because two people were buried there. But if you walk in and you look at it, these are clearly two gay men from 4,500 years ago who decided to be buried together. They are there on the frescoes, nose to nose, which is the Egyptian form of kissing. They're holding hands. They're going to banquets together. They had little small wives in the background, which probably means they culturally they had to have kids and wives and things. But this clearly is two gay men who went off to eternity together. But the key, most interesting thing about it is this is not tucked away in like some gay ghetto somewhere. This is not the West Hollywood or the Chelsea of ancient. It is right there in the royal necropolis, in the shadow of the step pyramid of Dozer, the great pharaoh, which means it was accepted. These people were not pariahs. They were allowed to have their tombs right next to the freaking pharaoh, which means that they were two men who wanted to make a tomb like this and be together was a non-issue. And to me, that's the greatest love letter. And again, the fact that it was called a Tomb of the Brothers suggests how we have gone back in terms of of acceptance, because no one in 1964 could believe that these two people could possibly be gay. One theorist contended they were Siamese twins, and that's why they were so close to one another. They literally could not walk away from each other. They were born nose to nose, touching nose to nose, and they're bending over backwards to show their homophobia. So again, history doesn't always march forward.
No, and you know, like even though we've been talking about ancient history, the harsh reality, especially in the community, is the fact that what hit the hardest was the AIDS pandemic.
Yeah,
And I mean that's pretty recent. It's only been 40 years. You
yeah.
know,
I
the
was a
the fact
child
that I
passing
can
through.
and I'll be honest with you, the amount of people that I've run into that are now in their 50s and 60s that remind me of people that they remembered my age back then, that they just kept on going to funerals every single week, every
Yeah,
single day without failure. We don't understand, but like that small little hiccup that happened in the late 70s throughout the 80s and 90s, that destroyed nearly I don't even know how much years of history
generation.
just
Yeah,
in
yeah,
that generations just gone.
yeah. Remember I did a show
That's
years
what?
ago.
That's 40 years ago.
Yeah, it was nothing. Again,
Crazy.
once again it shows you, like you mentioned, yeah, we can tame the grizzlies, and we killed off all the mountain lions, but we still aren't prepared for the contagions like AIDS or something that comes up and then kills millions of people or whatever. And you go to Africa, you see it even worse because they're not on the medications that we can now afford here. And we forget about it. I did a show years ago. It's actually a weight loss show, which is very strange. I was trying to do reality TV, so I branched onto one weight loss show, and I quickly went back to doing. I'm gonna do factual. This is not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
But it was very
Yeah.
interesting. It was about a gay guy in Chelsea and his happy husband, and he was very heavy set. And one of the reasons that he started eating weight, he says, "I'll show you when you come up to my house for Thanksgiving." We had a big scene there where, like, we're trying to create, will he eat baby carrots or will he go for the chocolate cake? We try to create the drama in these shows. It's like I'm thinking I have a master's of fine arts, and here I am trying to get him to, trying to make drama out of, will he
Baby
eat the carrots?
carrots.
Yeah, or will he eat
Yeah,
the
you gotta
chocolate cake?
zoom
This is
in.
drama.
You gotta zoom into the
But when we
carrots. You gotta
got
get that
there,
glow on them.
he took us into his fireplace room, and there above the
Hmm.
mantelpiece was photos of 40 beautiful men. And he goes, one of the reasons that I'm heavy now is these are all my friends in the early 80s that dies of AIDS. Look at them. They're all gorgeous, beautiful men. And they all died skinny and emaciated. And so I went to so many funerals and saw so many skinny people when I was in the early 80s and I saw a skinny man, I knew they were dying. So I've been feeding my face ever since. As long as I'm fat, I'm healthy. That's a psychological scar he got from having to live through it. And he was a survivor. He didn't have HIV, and he survived. But again, I remember looking at that wall of beauty, all these beautiful young men in the prime of their lives that were 30 years gone when I saw them on the wall. Luckily, I was born a generation too late for that, or I might have joined them. It's like it's all about timing.
I know, and it's weird because I'm literally the generation right after. Because like I'm born '99. Like I'm literally 4 years. Because '95 was when they actually started
Yeah,
being able to have
yeah,
like
it's
the
a big gap. Yeah,
and it's so strange living now because I think we share this same thing where I love history and being able to deep diving and just hearing all of those narratives and then seeing our modern time. It's like, yeah, it's great. We got planes, we've got all this technology, but yet what do we got? We got a community that's devastated with boxes and categories and labels. Definitely was bought in Staples. Okay, not Office Depot, guaranteed. And there's no direction anymore. It's like I don't understand. It's like we as people, don't we want to be able to have a life? Don't we want to be able to have that success? Don't we want to be able to have that future for ourselves, just like they did thousands of years ago? Just like those two people that were able to be buried together, nose to nose. But that idea has somewhat faded away because of decisions and consequences that we made 40 years ago.
I think one thing. I mean, certainly I wasn't even out yet when all the AIDS stuff, but I remember on the news, they couldn't even say the word AIDS, couldn't say the word gay. It was like Reagan wouldn't even acknowledge them because it was just a gay disease. No one really cared at the time. It's like, wow, that's only within my lifetime. So yes, we've made great strides. I'm married to my husband, who I've been with for 25 years, and we got married as soon as it became legal in New York, and I think 13 or 11 or something. And I never thought that would happen. But I also really feel like we won't get this down a political road, but I also feel a lot of that is being eroded right now with the current situation, what's happening, and people will gladly take that away from us. There was what the who was it, the Methodist or somebody down south of rallied to have gay marriage eradicated. There's no reason to think that what we have now, the advances we made, will stick around. And again, that's the thing of history. What we think stone step forward doesn't always stay there. It often goes several steps back again. And it's not just sexuality; it's all manner of things in terms of. Okay, again, COVID is a perfect example. We thought we could conquer anything, and here's this disease that came out of nowhere that blindsided us. And it really makes me angry when I go to I was born in Western Pennsylvania, which is now a very, very sort of conservative and very Trumpy and things like that, where in New York, of course, I'm my bubble. I remember going back and being in a bar, visiting my parents in my small town of Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and there were some guys at the bar that saying that COVID was all a conspiracy and never existed. That it was all, no one died of it. I hear him in downtown Brooklyn, across the street from Brooklyn Hospital. Not only did I hear the sirens 24/7, so in early 2020, when I heard a siren going to that hospital, I knew somebody was dying. And then when I would go out and do my walks, I would see the bodies being moved into the ice trucks because there was no room in the morgue. Up and down Ashland Avenue, where I live, there were 7 or 8 trucks lined up. And they would keep the bodies there, sometimes for a week or two, because the New York City morgues were too full of people. They kept entire families, dead people on ice. So don't you tell me it was bullshit. Boy, did I snap in those guys at that bar. Your ignorance, just because you live in some place that didn't see it, does not mean it didn't exist. And just because you don't want to get a jab and get your vaccine, that's your choice. But stay away from me and don't say it's a conspiracy because I can prove in a flash of an eye that I know people who died of it. It's like it makes me angry that people's conspiracies sometimes ride roughshod other people's experiences, and that's just selfish and insensitive.
No, I again, I can totally relate. I'm from New York. My parents were there. My dad passed away in April. He died during the first wave. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, he had health complications, but the way that they handled it and the way that they literally we had to force our way in there just to see him dead on a hospital bed. You know, look, there are a lot of explanations and there's a lot of things. You can go into gain of function research. You can go in with the way that diseases and pathogens and viruses have been changing over the. There's a lot of different things, but in the end of the day, the simple logical truth is this: if we take away communities, we separate, we isolate people, we make people feel that there are differences between them, okay, for
Mm.
political or skin tone or all this bullshit. It's like, this is ridiculous, man. It's like, what is destroying us is the fact that we can't sit down and have a goddamn conversation regardless of our differences.
Exactly.
And
Yeah. That's the greatest disappointment. We can't talk anymore.
no,
Everybody's
you
angry.
say,
Everybody's angry. Everybody's fragmented. Everybody sees an enemy in somebody else on both sides of the equation. And it's deeply depressing for those of us who just want to get on with our lives and just kind of like, you do you, I do you, and just don't tell me how to live my life. And I'll do the same.
I
Again,
think that
all these years of evolution and culture, and we're still having this conversation. So it's like, are we any different than Caligula? Probably not.
we're still thinking. We're still still thinking. We're still just trying to be able to find some type of normalcy in all of this. And you know, I think I told you this. I think one of the things that I always kind of loved very much about even figures like Harvey Milk was, even though he was a politician, he was one of the I think one of the only gay politicians we've ever had, where he wanted to talk to different people. He
Yeah,
constantly made it his mission to talk to different people and have as many, like, what's going on? What's going on with this street? Like, what's going on with your business? Like, oh my God, you need help? Like, that
yeah,
to me is just the most. genius way of not just making the puzzle, but figuring out why all those pieces go where they go. And
And try to find
it's
common ground, try to
like
find common ground. It's not just about
right,
sexuality, it's not just
exactly.
about politics, it's not just about, do you live in this part of town or that part of town? It's I remember when I was a films teacher, I went to film school and I taught 101 classes, and I always showed the Times of Harvey Milk, the documentary that came
It's
out. And I
amazing.
recommend everybody
It's
see it because
amazing.
there's milk on it. And there's that wonderful sequence, remember, where he like gets the Teamsters on his side because nobody else can get like Coors beers taken out of the bars in San Francisco. But he went and he listened to them. And these are a bunch of white dudes who are probably homophobic and they've never met a gay guy in their life. And this guy comes in and he convinces them to boycott all the bars with Coors because no one else listened to them. He was able to sit there and talk to people. So Harvey Milk is celebrated because his death was so tragic that he was gay, but also because he was able to cross aisles and talk to people, which seems like a dead art now. It just seems like it's almost impossible to listen to anybody right now. And even the days of Obama seem so long ago already. I feel like we've come so far from someone being able to listen to both sides of the story. Yeah.
And it's also something like I I tend to have like a very like libertarian mindset of where I like to look at even things at a small scale. Where focusing on the places where you live, your community, even like quote unquote in government terms, like your district. And I feel that's so important because in that environment, right? Just like we see all those communities and stories of being told of like people coming together and being able to share things with one another. You can have that in your own community. You can have those neighbors that you share experiences with. You have those food trucks that show up every Sunday and
Yeah.
Saturday.
Yeah.
Um, that I think is also part of Harvey's story. It's not just San Francisco. It's about him representing a community of all sorts of people. You know, I think that is the story of ancient history. It's not just Egypt. It's the story of what happened in Cairo. It's the stories that happened in Alexandria.
And I
All of those
mentioned Egypt.
different pieces.
Yeah, I shoot there a lot, but yeah, it's all the world. We don't know. There's so many stories that are lost. We have no idea what happened in the Indus Valley or ancient China, whatever. Because unless those stories are written down, those people are all forgotten. Most of what we know about people is their tombs, which is what they want to the world to be like, as opposed to what it was really like. So it's a shame that so much. If people ask me after 30 years of documentaries, why do you decide to write not only fiction but time travel fiction? And what is a response to that? It's like I know so much about the world. I love that world. I never get enough of that part of the world. But I also wanted to make some stuff up. I wanted to not see just a bunch of bleached dead ruins in the desert with one or two hieroglyphics on it or some broken papyrus. I wanted to bring that world to life and get people excited about what it looked like then. I wanted to live in that world. And I wanted to take a film crew back there and parody what TV is like and the media is like by taking them back. I blended those two worlds. But it was also liberating because I guess I say earlier, I could make some stuff up, but still based on fact. My second book, Primetime Pompeii, is all about the eruption of Pompeii in 79. And again, I made so many documentaries there, but I did so much research. So even though it's about a film crew trying to win an Emmy by going back and making a documentary with drones over Vesuvius, if you read that book, as soon as Vesuvius starts to rumble, you can bet that everything is based on fact. Even though I created the stories, the hour by hour description of what happens in Pompeii and the eruption is based on as much written account as we have. So I love taking those two things and bringing them together, but still knowing that you can trust the person who's telling the story, which is tough today. I guess that was my point. Trust. It's hard to believe the narrative anymore. You have to everyone
No,
questions every motives.
oh yeah. I mean everything has to have a reason. There has to be a reason as to why this is in there and a reason why this hasn't to be in there. And something I've even realized, especially when because I have a tendency where I write my own music, and you just sometimes have to get gritty. Okay, you don't have to be so tasteful. Sometimes it's important to be able to get those pieces in because, like, let's be honest, like I love superheroes, but the evil against good, like, come on, not everything is 100% good. There's a lot of things that
Exactly.
seem very nah,
Yeah.
nah.
We need our villains.
You do. You know, I think also something that people tend to forget is one of the ways that we advance and we create new things is kind of doing really bad stuff. Like really, really bad stuff. Like, you know, advancements in medical treatments and stuff. Like there's a lot of experimentation and a lot of people died.
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, like a lot of people.
Yes, and usually it's the people on the fringes. My husband is black, so he has a very different idea of the government. What they were doing. All the experiments they had on the blacks, in the 17, 18, and 1900s. So it's like he has more suspicion about government and medicine than I do because he has more, experiences in the past in terms of what happened to them. So yeah, look, everything is for progress, but there's a lot of victims along the way. A lot of bad shit goes along the way, which is
It
why we
is,
should be
but you know,
suspicious. Should be suspicious. Just not dumb. Be suspicious, but don't be dumb.
no, and I I think you said this earlier. Is like being able to have an open mind. You know, um, the truth is like, yeah, there's gonna be crap and shit that's gonna exist around you all the time, right? But you can't let that control your life. You know that it exists and it's a reality and it's a part of it, so you know what things to be careful to look out for, but you don't let that control you. You know that's dangerous waters right there.
Which is the reason why you love superheroes and I love time travel and stuff. We need escapism. We need to get away from it sometimes, and just where we can't change it. So let's have a bit of fun. Let's go create some stuff and have an adventure. Which is why I just
Yeah,
love fiction
I
and
think
I love
that,
movies.
and I think fiction is such a great storyteller too because it enables us to imagine and think beyond the box. You know, because I mean, hello, having literally a film crew go back in time and literally be able to be there the moment. Do you know that's like literally archaeology porn right there? Like straight up.
Yeah. They would, archaeologists would kill. Say, I know I'm going to die and be, evaporated, but I still would give it up just so I could see. There's people who live and breathe the ruins of Pompeii. They would give up their life just to see it. And the TV people. I mean, that's why I make a film crew. One of the things that I think works in terms of living. I wrote another book my first book, which I never published, was about ancient Egypt, and it all took place in ancient Egypt, and I loved it. But some friends said it was a bit too hermetic. They couldn't visualize, they couldn't relate to the people, they couldn't see it like somebody living in that world. But by taking somebody like us, a media crew that goes back and they describe it as you would see it, now it comes alive for anybody today. So that's sort of the trick of you have to take somebody who's going to be the surrogate for you to see it. So when Pompeii exists and you got it through a camera lens and you got a guy standing there like a fake Indiana Jones giving commentary, we can see it like they see it, and hopefully it transports people and it creates it creates the world building that allows you as a 21st century denizen to be transported back with them and see it through their
Yeah.
eyes.
Have you seen the videos that have been flying around where I think somebody used AI to create where imagining like Moses holding up a phone and then like recording him right after the bush and then having to talk to
No,
I think
I
it was
haven't seen that.
Ramses. Oh my god, it's
Oh, send
hilarious.
me that. I love to see that because it's
It's
probably so much
so
fun. Yeah,
hilarious. No, but it's so funny in the sense where like because of this technology, we're able to like get that idea you're talking about. Is like
yeah,
imagine if Moses had a phone, you know? Like first off, by the way, like reality check, like there's a lot of research to believe that Moses, like the way that he's depicted is not historically accurate. You know, like there's also that thing too where a lot of these historical figures we don't really know what they look like. Like there wasn't like you said like there's no film camera
yeah,
or you know a digital camera that was around 3,000 years ago you could snap a picture of
yeah.
Nero. Like
Yeah, it wasn't like the
didn't
Old Testament
exist.
described. They didn't, the Old Testament doesn't say Moses stood about 5'8", had a long, flowy white beard, walked with a slight limp.
No.
They weren't concerned about that
Nope.
stuff, so you make it up. Jesus, we don't know Jesus. Jesus, he was from Judea, so he probably didn't look like this white guy from Scandinavia that we made him kind of look like today. But the people who create those narratives later have to put a face on it somehow. And again, that's why it goes back to like history is written by the winners. So if Suetonius is the only person writing the story about the Caesars, that's what we're going to think the Caesars are. Everything else gets rotted away and disappears. So it's happenstance too. There's this. One of my favorite accidental discoveries of all time is a cache of letters. Again, Egypt. I have Egypt on the brain, for forgive me, and I'll make this a short story. But
No,
the
it's
Middle
okay.
Kingdom.
I love Egypt.
Okay,
Yeah, keep
the
going.
Middle Kingdom of Egypt is about 800-year period. No one really knows too much about, but one of the greatest evidence we have of what life was like was not from a tomb or a temple, but it was from a cache of letters that a father had sent to his son. That through happenstance of history got saved because a pillar fell on it. And while everything else about that culture disappeared, these two little squabbling men back and forth, their letters are preserved to tell us more than we know about kings and queens. And the whole story is about the father going up to Memphis up north, and he's left the farm in charge of his son, who he doesn't trust, and his new wife he left behind says, "You take care of my new wife. I know she's not your mom, but you treat her with respect." And and we only have the letters from the father to the son. So what probably happened was the son went to the mailbox or wherever letters were delivered at the time. They had mail service back then, and he read them and he tucked them under this little temple that he was reading. And we never got the responses, of course, because he sent them off to Memphis. But we get these more angry and angry letters from the father saying, "How come you treated my new wife with such disrespect?" And then it went, "What happened to my wife? Why is she not there? Where does she go?" So you have this squabble, 4,000 years old, of these two forgotten people. You wouldn't know anything about it. And they're just regular letters. And because a pillar collapsed and fell on this is preserved for all time when important stuff about naval battles and about kings and queens and what the temple looked like all got swept away through history. What we know is about this angry father writing letters to his near to well son. And that pretty
Ancient
much is,
tweet.
yeah, exactly. And that again, that is through just through an accident of history that survives, and all the huge temples and obelisks they built are long gone. I just love that happenstance of history. Like Agatha Christie wrote a novel based on it. Like I think it was called "Death Comes at the End," and it all takes place. Take these characters, and it's about the new wife being killed, and who did it. It becomes that famous. But that's history. It's just some things survive, and some things we think will survive forever disappear.
Yeah, you know what? Like I saw this recently. This is a story that happened many years ago. There was I forgot the name of the company, but they this genius idea of where they were gonna basically make like this time case for this car in the 1950s, and then like down the road they're gonna open it up and the car's gonna be all shiny. Sure enough, I think it was like 2007. They open up the case, car's completely ruined, flooded, gone. And like it's on display in a museum, but it's just like the greatest example of like, okay, they tried to preserve history, but
Yeah,
nature had
and it
other
didn't last more
plans.
than a couple of centuries, a couple of decades. I mean, as opposed to like letters from 3,000 years ago. So we think it's going to be
Yeah.
there. All those time capsules, they put in the cornerstones of buildings. They'll probably forget about them, or they'll find them, and they're all, it got rained on, and got ruined, and
The- we don't realize, but like this idea of preservance is such a rudimentary term in the sense where what are you supposed to preserve? You're supposed to preserve nature taking over like it does. Like you leave a house alone for 5 6 years. There's no house. I mean, look at
yeah,
Detroit. You go down a block. You're like, where the hell are all these houses? Well, the trees ate up the freaking houses.
things are reclaimed. I mean, the Earth is going to win, and what's fascinating is the bits that remain and bits that don't. Because there was this great book, a parody book that came out, I think in the '80s, called Mysteries of the Hotel or something. Do you remember this book?
Okay. Mm-mm.
And yeah, what it was written as a scientist in like the 22nd century or something, as if it was an archaeological report. And he had found what he thought was a temple, this great temple to the 20th century culture, which was wiped out by an atomic bomb. And they finally found some archaeological evidence of what it was like. And what it was a Motel 6. And they're going through, and all these archaeologists are looking at all this shit in this crappy motel. And I remember the best bit was they find a toilet seat. And they say, well, this must be the crown for the king. This must have been what went around him in a necklace that proved he was the king. And his throne must be this strange porcelain thing here. So it was making fun of the archaeologists looking back and getting everything wrong. But again, the only thing that survives is a shitty hotel on the edge of town, and they're seeing it as like, the temple because that's all
Right.
that's left. So it's really making fun of what we were talking about before. Is like archaeologists can get it wrong all the time.
They do, and you know what? Again, you're going off of just what you have, and you know what? I think the way I want to tie this in is that one thing I've noticed, especially like even in your own work, it's like it's not just being able to tell the story with all the information, being able to have the narrative and have the script and be able to get all those pieces together. It's understanding just like that example. It's we're looking at this as if it's a temple with this king's seat and necklace that he's wearing, even though it's a Motel 6, because we don't have any more information.
That's all we got. It's
That's
all we got.
that's all we got.
Yeah. And people always want to import great importance to thing. It must be, I don't know how many times they find some sort of strange figure and they say it was religious motive. It was a mother goddess figure. For all we know, it would have been porn, but but they call it a mother goddess figure. I don't know. It could have just been a blow up doll.
And I mean, again, like even in our own modern culture, there are so many different things that are part of our past. Even for example, in New York, that they don't exist anymore. We just have like quote unquote historical evidence from photos and people's like Max's Kansas City, Studio 57, Stonewall Inn, which technically still exists, but it's not really the same that it
Yeah,
was.
not the same, right? Now,
It's
yeah, now
not.
like
It's
couples who falls go there and get the T-shirt.
Yeah, yeah, by the gift shop, which
Yeah,
I don't think there was a gift
exactly.
shop in 1969.
I don't think there was.
No, no. So there's that too. It's like even in our short period of history, right?
Mhm.
Things are changing archaeologically changing, right? Because as an archaeologist right now, if you didn't know that that existed in 1969, you would have never believed that that's what it was.
Right. Because it's otherwise, I wasn't around them, but it's otherwise just a regular hidden gay bar that was trying to be anonymous as opposed to stand out. And if Stonewall hadn't happened there, it would have been disappeared, when it would have been forgotten, like all the other bars or whatever. And
No
you
one would
walk
have
down
known about
Christopher
it.
Street now. I remember going there as a gay kid in the '80s and being dazzled by all the gay bars and porn shops and bathhouses on Christopher Street, and they're all gone now. Now it's all like Marc Jacobs and all this kind of like high end bag stores or whatever. And there's history of that, there's photos of it, but things get swept away so much quicker now, I think, that you need history for that. It's not just you have to go back to ancient history, that's my thing. But yeah, as you say, history can go back to 5, 10 years ago. Nostalgia does wonder for history, and thank God people are preserving it. Thank God we're in an age now where things are electronically recorded forever and people are writing about it because we are leaving much more evidence for obvious reasons with the technology we have than we were even 50, 60, 100 years ago, where things just kind of disappeared because Charlie Chaplin movies rotted away because they left them in a canister somewhere in Jersey and it got wet and it's gone forever, and that's just 100 years ago. So
Think
let's hope that some of this stuff survives.
Well, Carl Jung said that because of all the broadcasting that we do, and now even with all the satellites, the amount of waves that are coming off of our planet, we don't realize, but we're actually sending out our history through our known universe. You know, in many ways, like our history might be getting preserved by other species, even
Imagine
millions,
what they
even
think if they base our life on like whatever they see on reruns of Gilligan's Island that are coming through
yeah.
the like,
What is
well,
this?
let's
Or
just blow them
Mash?
up. They're dumb. They're
Or Green
exactly
Acres?
right. What a
Look
primitive
like
planet.
Beverly Hillbillies. What's this?
Takes a while for these waves to travel, so they're just getting like it comes from the '60s just now.
I think though, if they get I Love Lucy, we should be okay because they'll be like, "Oh
Yeah, as long as they
wow,
get some of the good ones, right?
yeah, okay, all right, we're okay, all right, phew, all
Yeah,
right." For a second
we'll
there, we
get
thought we
through.
were doomed.
We just gotta wait until the Sopranos and Game of Thrones shows up. Where it's got to get to the '70s and kind of get through all the cheesy IG Maginis. Just sit tight, you'll get there. Just you know,
They'll land, they'll be like, they'll come down there and they're like, "All right, where's Hawaii 5-0?"
right?
That's a TV show.
Yeah,
They got their
that show
Hawaiian
was 50
shirts.
years ago, right? That they're real people, right? That's why I love a Galaxy
Right.
Quest. It's brilliant. People think like they're the real deal.
No, no,
All
it's all
right.
fiction.
I'm gonna have to wrap it up. I have a few things to do, but it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
good talk for now.
No, 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 100%, man. Before we wrap up, I wanted to just ask you. We mentioned your book. I know that you also have a bunch of documentaries. You have a bunch different TV networks. Where can these people find all of your stuff and your
Well, my
books, of
books
course?
are independently published. You can get them on Amazon. So if you Google Neil Laird, or I call them the Primetime Travelers series. There's two out now: Primetime Travelers and Primetime Pompeii. Amazon has them both. They're my distributor, and then I'm writing Primetime Troy right now, the third one. So you can find them there.
Nice.
My films are all over. I'm working for History Channel now on a couple of series for them. So if you watch History, you'll probably or Discovery or BBC or PBS. Eventually, my name comes up. If it's ancient history, my name probably pops up already. But as for the books, they're on Amazon, and if you want to go to my website, you can. There's a newsletter. I send a newsletter out every couple of months talking about my travels. I was just exploring some Etruscan tombs in Italy last month, so the new newsletter is about that and about what it's like to be the first to go into a 2,000-year-old tomb and see a spider from ancient times attack you. All that kind of stuff is in there. So my website,
Nice.
neillaird.com, would take you there.
Love that, man. And again, Neil, I have to say, I really appreciate you taking the time to coming out and like literally laying out all the history, even going back 8,000 years. Man. 'Cause
We
Woo!
crammed a lot into 90 minutes, I think.
We did. And if anybody out there, you could find the podcast at Lost the Groove Pod everywhere. Regarding Neil and want to find his books, I'm going to make sure in the Substack there will be a click button you can do. Site as well. So, with that, catch you guys. All right, peace out.